Good evening. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all here to the Gene Rimsky Theater. Thank you all so much for being here, and I'd also like to welcome those joining us via live stream at home. My name is Amanda Kowalczyk. I'm the Manager of Community Affairs here at the Landmark on Main. I'm very glad that you're all here tonight to be a part of this event. We are partnering with an amazing local organization in town, Be the Rainbow, to bring you this conversation in support of the LGBTQIA+ community. I know June is a busy month for everyone, and your presence here tonight is a testament to how important this topic is to our community. So again, thank you very much for your presence this evening. Before I hand the mic over to Melanie Dorigo to introduce our panelists, I would like to send a special thank you to Angela Jagger. The Angela and Scott Jagger Foundation is the entire reason that the Conversations from Main Street series exists. Angela couldn't be here this evening with us, but without her funding, this event would not be possible. So please join me in thanking her with a round of applause. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Melanie Dorigo, co-founder of Be the Rainbow and the executive director of the Campaign for New York Health, who will get our evening started. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Welcome, everyone. I am so thrilled to be here with you today as we kick off Pride Month here in Port Washington for this wonderful conversation on Main Street, Allyship is an action. I couldn't be more excited to introduce you to my esteemed panelists who are heavy hitters in their own right, which you'll soon get to know. But before we dig in, let me go ahead and read you their bios. So first, I'd like to introduce Julie Gray Owens, a New York State transgender activist who is the founder and executive director of Gender Equality New York, Inc., a nonprofit corporation whose mission is to advocate for transgender, non-binary, and intersex New Yorkers through education, advocacy, and empowerment. In 2017, she was recognized by City and State New York Magazine as one of the 10 people making a difference for LGBT New Yorkers. Come on, we could give it up for that, right? In 2019, she was again recognized by City and State Magazine in their Pride Power 100 list, which recognizes the most influential figures in the LGBTQ community in New York. And I hold the opinion that she is by far and away the most influential transgender activist on Long Island and throughout the state. So we're thrilled to have you here, Julie. Thank you for being here. And secondly, I'd love to introduce you to my friend Susan Goderer. She's the director of the Nassau County New York Civil Liberties Union, the New York State affiliate of the ACLU, and has been a lifelong activist and part of the New York civil liberties family since 2006. She has fought for immigration, reproductive and voting rights, police reform, and criminal defense reform. She is heavily engaged in combating the false narratives around bail reform and in the efforts to end mass incarceration. Susan holds a master's degree in education from Columbia University, a master's in political science from the New School for Social Research, and a master's in public administration policy analysis from New York University. Wow. She's an adjunct professor of political science at Pace University, Adelphi, and LIU Long Island, and has 8 years of public relations experience. And I can share with you that she is the go-to for every activist across Long Island. Thank you for being here. Wonderful. So, before we dig into our panels, I'd like to take a minute to talk a little bit about what Pride is, right? Are we excited for Pride? Let me hear. Are you excited for Pride? Okay, good. You know we've got a Pride event coming up. June 14th is Chalk the Walk. June 15th is our annual Pride Walk and Festival. And while certainly here in Port Washington, it is a family-friendly, beautiful celebration of love and allyship and inclusivity and diversity, I do want to take a moment to honor the roots of Pride, right? And talk for a moment about what Pride means, where we've come, and the work that we still have left to do. So you may or may not know this, but Pride was born out of the uprisings of Stonewall, right? And sometimes it's written about as sort of this one flash pan moment where the LGBTQIA community fought back and they grabbed their power back and fought against the police because they deserve to be treated like human beings, right? But the truth is that it was far from a one-off event. There were police raids and all sorts of oppression happening for decades. And it was sort of just the moment that broke, the straw that broke the camel's back, as we like to say, right? And a year later, it was the first Pride, right? Now, Stonewall's not too far from where we are here, right? But I think it's important to honor that struggle. So when we show up to Pride as allies or as members of the community, we have every right to celebrate the hard-won struggles, right? But it's also important to understand the gravity of the situation that we're in and the work that is still left to do. So through our conversation tonight, we hope to dig in a little bit more to that. We hope that this discussion will help you understand what allyship is and how to be better allies in our community. So with that, I would like to first start with some basic kind of understanding, just so we're on the same page. And my first question is going to be for Julie. And Julie, I wonder if you can help our audience understand who the queer community is. What is the LGBTQIA plus community? What does that stand for?
Well, it really breaks down into two groups, and then we can break them out even further. The first, obviously, is people whose sexual orientation varies, and then there's a community of people whose gender identity varies. And so when we break it out and you take a look at each individual letter, L being for lesbian, G being for gay, B for bisexual, T for transgender, Q for queer or questioning, I for intersex, A for asexual, and also in some cases, some people consider that to be ally. I would suggest to you that recently I saw that the extension of the letters has been added with a number and another letter, which is LGBTQIA 2S+. And the 2S standing for the Two-Spirit people, which is for Indigenous Americans who may have a variation in their gender, shall we say. Mm-hmm. So I think that kind of covers the community as a whole.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Julie. I appreciate that. And I wonder if you can tell us, and we didn't introduce ourselves individually, so we sort of missed this part, but if I were to introduce myself to you all, I would say, hello, good evening. My name is Melanie DeRigo, and I use she, her pronouns. Some people wonder, well, why is she saying that? Julie, can you tell us why I would introduce my pronouns, and why is it important to introduce pronouns?
Well, for many of our community members, those that have variation in their gender, shall we say, they don't all go by the pronouns that might match their sex designation at birth. For me, I was designated male at birth. However, my pronouns are she, her, hers. There will be some people that would be gender non-binary, and they would use they, them pronouns. So usually when we, and I see this more and more in organizations and meetings, and we're starting to see a little bit in email signature lines as well. An organization will ask their members to give their pronouns so that we normalize the exchange of pronouns between people. This takes away the stigma or the pressure for those of us who don't necessarily match up with our sex designation and our pronouns to have to proclaim that, for example, in my case, I'm a she, her, hers. If we already, all of us do it on a regular basis, it just normalizes it, everybody relaxes, and oh, okay, that's good to know that you use a they or them, and it's good to know that you use a she or her, and it's good to know that you use a he, him, his, that type of thing. So we really want to just kind of simplify it, normalize it, and just kind of create an environment where everyone feels welcome and included, and no one feels ostracized or, the odd one in the group.
I love that you said that. I was once having a conversation with a member of the queer community, and they said to me, it's so meaningful when cisgender allies tell me their pronouns, or I come into a meeting and everyone starts announcing their pronouns, because it signals to me that it is a safe place for me. And I think that's really important when we think about allyship, especially for cisgender folks, to decenter ourselves, in that space, and really begin to expand the room and create a safe place for our friends.
I think it also, I think what's important about it is that it also removes the default that heteronormativity and cisgender is the default, and that we are all going to be a part of identifying, right? So I think that that's really super important.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Well, except for one thing. I'm not sure that everyone knows what cisgender means.
or heteronormity. But
Right.
I think, and in a moment, I want you to define that for our audience, but I do think that what you said is another way for allies to think about it. We often center ourselves in our life, right? We've been doing it our whole lives, thinking about, well, I'm normal, right? We have to challenge these concepts of what is normal, what is default, into a more expansive and expressive world. But please, Julie, if you can define for us cisgender and heteronormativity, that would be, I think, helpful for our audience.
Well, I will say, first of all, I do a lot of trainings, and before I start talking about people like me, the first thing I say is, let me talk about people like you, and that's under the assumption that my audience is usually mostly cisgender people. Now, let's talk about what cisgender actually means. The term cisgender simply means that the sex designation that you're given at birth, so in other words, in the delivery room, the baby comes out and someone takes a look between the legs and yells out, it's a boy or it's a girl, and today they put it in the computer, and that designation will be used on all the legal papers for that person from that point on, unless it's legally changed. So a cisgender person is a person whose personal identity, their gender identity specifically, matches that designation. And that's all it means. It doesn't have anything to do with sexual orientation. It means nothing other than the fact that that person matches the designation given at birth. Transgender, the secondary term, the other term, simply means that the person does not match the sex designation given to them at birth. So, for example, in my case, there's a big old M on my birth certificate. Doesn't really match me. So I am transgender in the universal, big umbrella, if you will, terminology. And again, being transgender tells you nothing at all about my sexual orientation. It just simply means that I don't match the sex designation given at birth.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you for defining those terms. Very important in the context of this discussion. My next question is for Susan. Susan, in recent times, we have thankfully seen more and more people, after many, many decades of oppression, starting to really come out in support of the queer community. However, most of our queer allies and community members still experience discrimination, bias, hate crimes, and barriers to health care at increasing frequency. What do you think are the most important attributes of an ally in the context of all these terrible things that are happening?
So before I get to that, I just want to talk a little bit about what I think is the most important piece, and it's before anybody can see it in the outside world that you are an ally. You have to make a decision to commit to your own humility, to understanding that you may have trouble ascertaining the experience of another person that you are not like in many ways. And once you can do that, then you can start to begin to understand how you can be an ally and how you can do it with humility. So the opposite of being a good ally is stepping forward and saying, I know what's best for you. I'm going to take the lead and tell your community how to solve its problems, which is what people have been doing forever. And so I think an analogy for me was when I was trying to wrap my head around being a good ally. What does it mean? I'm going to make mistakes. My mistakes are going to scare me. I might get called out publicly for saying or doing something wrong or hurtful, which really means when you say or do something wrong, it really means that you might have caused harm to somebody, right? And that's where the humility comes in, to understanding that you don't really understand their experience and you have a lot to learn. And this taking the lead part of not being a good ally. So I sort of wrapped my head and tried to figure out, okay, how, because we're the ACLU, we're a very white organization. And so we needed to learn to step back. And the way I began to think about it is from the point of view that I experience power against me is through gender, right? And so my analogy for myself was when I needed to remind myself to step back. Imagine, but this was before the Dobbs decision. Imagine that something horrible happens to women, that rights get taken away, and there's a whole bunch of women in a house, and they're trying to figure out what to do about this, right? We're huddled, we're hunkered down, we're trying to come up with a plan. There's a house down the road that's filled with men who are hunkered down too, and they're upset about it, and they want to they want to do something to help. So they come up with a plan. They come down the street, they knock on the door where the women are hunkered down, and they say, okay, I know what we have to do, follow us, right? And that's not being a good ally. That's the exact example of you have to center, you have to step back, the communities know what's best for them. The communities are going to speak for themselves. They may come to activists and advocates and say, I'm not quite sure how to organize this, can you show us? In which case you do, but you don't stand at the front of the room and tell everybody else what to do, especially when you're not a part of that community. So that's part of being a good ally. That's one of the pieces of being a good ally.
Yeah. Amazing. And I suspect if you're here in our audience or watching from home, hi to those watching from home, you're here because you either are an ally or you want to be a better ally and you're here to learn, right? And I think it's important to name that no matter where we are in our lives, no matter where we are on any type of spectrum, we all have privilege, right? And we all have power. And it's important to think about how we use that privilege and power in the context of allyship. So before I get to my next question, which I think is going to be really good, I want each of you to think about, I don't want you to say it out loud, we'll circle back to it later, but right now I want you to think about how you are as an ally. How do you think you show up in your community? And I'm going to ask you again later the same question, and I want to see if you've learned a little, if you've stretched a little, if you've grown a little. And I want to say, if you feel a little uncomfortable, that's a very good sign, because that means you're growing, okay? So uncomfortability in the context of becoming a better ally is a very good sign, right? So Julie, and I think a lot of our folks are here to really understand the tangible acts and the tips and what does it look like to show up for our queer community. So I wonder, do you have specific tips for individuals? And they can be sort of general. They don't have to be, totally zeroed in, but general tips that people can aspire to or utilize in their communities to show up.
Well, I think the first thing is to perhaps even change your beliefs, especially when we're dealing with our community. One of the things that we stress is that we're just human beings like everyone else. We have good days, we have bad days, we have goals, we have wishes, we have things that don't go our way. And we're not deranged. You know, we don't have evil intent. We don't have thoughts of converting people. That's a whole nother thing that we constantly hear. So the first understanding is just understanding that we're just people. We may be a little different than you, but that shouldn't be an issue, let's put it that way. And what we always like to say is that you may not understand, for example, our gender identity as an example, but that doesn't mean that you can't respect us just as a human being and perhaps try to learn a little bit more about us. So those are, I think, really like the foundational items to understand, you know, the whole rainbow of people in the LGBT community. We're just trying to get along. And unfortunately, what makes it hard for us is that there's a significant amount of discrimination and hate, unfortunately, which is posed against our community. And when we talk about a little bit about intersectionality, when you add race to that, for example, transgender women of color are the most put upon, the most violently attacked in our community. So we have to be aware of that, you know, in dealing with our community, you know, just in general, being aware of that. But there's also a number of things. I mean, it's important, if you don't know a lot about us, then that means you need to do your homework. And you need to see videos, you need to see movies or documentaries, you need to read books about us. You need to understand what makes us who we are. And we could spend a whole 2 or 3 hours just on that alone. So that's an important point. The other thing that's very important is because, especially when we talk about the transgender and gender non-binary community, we're talking about a very small community. And so if it's left up to us to do the modification of legislation, passing bills, and so forth, you can only imagine how hard that is. We absolutely need the political power of numbers, and the only way to do that is by gaining our allies. So that's another area where, you know, and I think we can probably talk a lot more about that, but I think it's something where if you really want to see change, you have to make the change happen. And what makes it worse for our community is, and especially, again, I'm going to be talking specifically about the transgender community and non-binary community, but it also includes, for example, the intersex community. We can talk a little bit more about that, a very, very small community. Many of our members have been so put upon, so discriminated against, their life has been so filled with violence and hate that they are unable to carry the torch and do the work that's necessary. And so it really falls additionally on those of us who may have a little bit of less gender dysphoria than, for example, others may have, to have to do even more to try to do that. And so, you know, our focus has always been to do whatever we can to gain as many allies, and we do that through education, because we feel that the more people, the more cisgender people that we can add to our base, the more likely we'll be able to accomplish things. I'm wondering whether you would like to add.
Yes, I hope, Melanie, tell me I don't want to hijack, but,
No, go for
but this, of course, reminded me of some things that I wanted to say as far as being a good ally as well. And I'm going to invite Julie to correct me or add or subtract. So when we talk about, we call it the heavy lifting, right? So the example that I gave before is that the communities, you can't step in and tell communities what to do when you don't even have their experience. However, there is also the concept of they're going to end up doing the heavy lifting. And there's also something unfair about that as well. So as I was doing my learning curve about how to exist in the social justice spaces, having the white privilege that I have, and where should I be, and stepping forward, stepping back, all of those things, that question of centering the voices of the community and this is their fight and they're taking the lead, but then they're also doing the heavy lifting. And that was confusing for me. That was like, well, do you want me to do this or not? You know, like when I first learning, I was like, again, that's binary thinking, right? Yes or no? Do you want me there or not, right? And so I think that as allies, what it's important to say is, first of all, be aware of that concept and the harm that it inflicts for everybody to do the emotional lifting and the actual work lifting. And so I think the right thing to do is to say, what can I do for you? Where would you like me to be? What can I do to support? Is this feeling so traumatic for you? Do you need me to step up? Like, ask those questions, right? Don't just do them automatically, but ask the questions. Is that right? Right on target. Okay. So, and the other component of this heavy lifting is also on a more micro scale in your individual conversations, relationships with people. Don't ask somebody you may just have harmed to let you off the hook. Don't ask them to do that emotional work. That's not fair. Because chances are good, they're probably enraged, they might be traumatized, and now you're asking them to focus on you, and that's not fair. I think we've all had these situations in our lives where we want to bring it back to us, right, and get ourselves off the hook. That's not what this is about, and that's not being a good ally. So,
Susan, can you give us an example of what that might look like? And it doesn't have to be the worst example. It could be a basic interaction.
Yeah. So the crossing the street situation that I had, do you think?
You can,
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I just got off the road from Albany, so my brain's now. Okay. Yes. There's actually several. I'm not proud to say. There was, when I first started working at NICLU, there was a transgender individual, and I had not met anybody who was transgender at that point. And I asked them a question about their life and what they were wearing or whatever it was. It was not a good thing to do. And I knew instinctively that I couldn't go to them and apologize right off the bat. So I really didn't know what to do. I kind of froze. And so in that moment, I think it was important for me, there was a gut instinct that told me, I can't make this person do labor after I've already done that harm. So I went to a close friend and asked their advice about what to do. And sometimes it's as simple as, oh, I know them, they'll be fine. You can say you're sorry to them. It would be cool, right? So you just need to understand that these are the dynamics, and that I think the most important piece is that if you're a person of privilege and you don't know what it feels like to go through your day, constantly reminded of how you're different. It's like 1,000 paper cuts all day long, right? And if we don't know that experience, then we aren't going to know how to make up for it when we cause it as well. And so the best thing to do is to educate yourselves, read, put yourselves in proximity. Don't stay in your little enclaves of people who all look and act like you and are the same as you, because the real answer to this is getting in proximity to people who are different than yourselves and learning about them and learning about their experience. And I promise you, if you do that, you will be humbled, hopefully. You will be able to handle that, hopefully. And you will learn about that person and those people every single day. And again, that will come with humility. I do want to say one other thing about, you said discomfort. So in education circles, that is called the learning edge. I don't know if there's any teachers in the room. Okay. The learning edge is that spot where somebody says something to you that you do not want to accept, you have 1,000 arguments against, and you're ready to launch your arguments. The learning edge is you make a decision. I'm really uncomfortable right now. I'm feeling defensive. I think that person is wrong, but you don't come back at them. You sit in the discomfort. Now, I've done this to students. I'm an adjunct professor. I've done this to students with grading situations, and they've literally gotten out of their seats like this. Like they'll like they can't in the store. I go, okay, stand there, be uncomfortable, just stand there, and be uncomfortable. Don't say anything, just be uncomfortable. That's the learning edge. And if you can stay there, then you will then be open to hearing something that you may not have heard before. So that's a part of all of this, and that's part of being a good ally.
Yeah, and I want to say that, times are changing, and I like to think here, even in Port Washington, there's been a lot of work in support of the queer community, right? So you will make mistakes. It's going to happen, right? And that's where that discomfort piece is so important to understand, because none of us like to hurt people. None of us like to do the wrong thing. We don't like making mistakes generally as human beings, but it is going to happen. It just will. It's human nature. Keep going. Learn from it and keep going.
There are a number of things, though, that what I'm worried about is that the audience is hearing, well, be really careful. Don't step out on the ice. Be careful. And the reality is that what we really need to do is reach out person to person, human being to human being. There are some, I will call them special rules that might be helpful. For example, for a transgender person, we really don't want you asking about our sexuality. We don't want you asking about our transition status, whether we've had surgery, whether we take hormones. Those aren't the kind of questions that we want to answer. It's really none of your business. So that's a part of it. It's also important to understand that, for example, our driver's license may say John, but we may present as Mary. And so when you call us John, even though that's our legal name perhaps, not only is it hurtful internally, but it's also dangerous. Because someone who, you may mean no harm at all, but there may be a person standing over there that hears that this person that looks like Mary is being called John. Wait a minute, they're transgender, and then there can be problems. So you need to be aware of that. And we talked a little bit about pronouns, but pronouns are also important in the respect that we want to be able to, when we meet a person for the first time, that's one of the reasons why we talk about, greeting someone and stating our pronouns. Like, for example, if I didn't know Susan, I might come up and say, hi, my name is Julie Gray Owens, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. What's your name and what's your pronouns?
Susan Goderer, she, her, hers.
Right. So now we've communicated, we've created a base of a baseline that we can all deal with now. And I guess what I'm concerned about is I don't want people to be afraid to be able to be friendly. I'm so afraid that I'm going to hurt someone that I'm just going to stand in the back and not say anything because it's safer that way. That's really not going to be allyship.
It's not being a good ally, right?
So yes, we have to be careful. Yes, we need to be, have humility. All those are true. But really, on a one-to-one basis, we just need to be human beings and just want to, get to know this person, or that type of thing. So I know in this conversation we're going to bring up little do's and don'ts, but I don't want to make it so impactful that it's better not to say anything at all than to get in trouble, because that's defeating.
Because you will get in trouble,
Yeah.
right? If you are on the journey of being an ally, and it is a journey, you will get in trouble. You just will, because you're learning and it's new. And I think that's so important. And that's what I really want you to walk out of this room, certainly understanding ways to grow and learn, but don't lose that ability to recognize and see people as human beings. This is the worst example, but the decentering of ourselves and our own understanding of the way the world works, I think is so important. Like Julie said, it's none of your damn business, right? There are certain things that are none of your damn business, and who we are, we've got to get past this idea that sexuality and gender identity somehow defines who we are. It's part of who we are, but I'll tell you something, and sorry for the hockey fans, I don't understand hockey at all, and I love sports, but I don't freaking understand hockey at all. Some people love it. none of my damn business, right? I mean, it's really this concept of stepping outside of our little paradigms and our boxes. But I do want to highlight some stuff because so many good tips came up already in this conversation, and I'm a big believer in repetition. So some of the things we're hearing from Julie and Susan in terms of being good allies is using inclusive language, right? We heard that continues to come up. Listen to the LGBTQIA community, right? Go to them and understand how you can be helpful. And it's okay, right? If we might make a mistake here. I sometimes reach out to Julie and I go, how can I help? What can I do? And she's like, I'm so overwhelmed, I'll let you know. And I don't want to add more to Julie's plate, but we want to help. And that's sort of part of that process. And I think we will talk a little bit more. Julie did touch upon the importance of growing our allyship and raising our voices and really understanding our privilege, right? That's so critical in this movement and in this fight. So I just wanted to highlight that as we're moving on here. Excuse me. Quick question that comes up a lot. I think I had mentioned to you both, and I suspect many of our audience members know that Be the Rainbow holds a Pride Festival every year. It's pretty new. We're a few years old. It's a great addition to this town, in my opinion. But folks do ask us, right? Well, I'm an ally. I'm here. Is that enough? It's a loaded question, right?
In my mind, no, because, I mean, any step is a positive step. Don't get me wrong. But where the rubber meets the road is, for example, when we are, one of the pieces of legislation that we're working on is to protect transgender women in our county jails and state prisons. Because as you can imagine, many of our transgender women who may be incarcerated are being placed in the male sections of the county jails and the prisons, which is terrifying from a standpoint of the physical and emotional violence that impacts those people who are incarcerated, but even from a standpoint of some simple things, like, for example, if a trans woman needed a bra, the ability to be able to get a bra in a male's prison has to go through so many steps. They have to requisition it at that prison, send the requisition over to the female prison. They then have to purchase it and then get it, and then somehow get it back to the male jail, which then it has to then be distributed. Well, there's an awful lot of handoffs there, and if we know anything at all about the prison industrial complex, those handoffs are very hard to connect at times. So something as simple as just having the appropriate wardrobe for one of our people, one of our community members, while they're incarcerated, it becomes a big deal. Much less any kind of medical care that they may need, which is above and beyond, what a cisgender male may need or something like that. So having a lawn sign or hanging out a pride flag is a wonderful step. I would never denigrate it or downgrade it. But we're talking about, if you really want to talk about being an ally, really stepping up, stepping out, and helping demand for change just for basic human rights.
Yeah. So it's sort of like step one, right? It's the beginning of your journey. It's not the destination, right? And that's probably why many of you are here tonight, to learn how to become more involved. And I do just want to take a moment to mention, I think it's worth noting, transgender women are among the most marginalized people in our society. Oftentimes, transgender youth are thrown out of their homes. They have higher rates of homelessness. Oftentimes, they do end up, and I don't want to generalize, but oftentimes we do see, particularly here, we see folks incarcerated in the county jails, often with substance abuse and substance abuse issues or drug abuse issues, which are really medical issues, right? And so sometimes they end up incarcerated and we think, oh, well, they must have committed a crime. But it's really all of our sort of societal structures that are failing them that have led them there. And then they are re-traumatized once they're there. And I think that's an important point. But I suspect Susan has something to say here as well.
Yeah, I mean, everything from if starting with I'm going to the Pride Parade and I'm putting a Pride flag out at my house, that's great. the next time, maybe practice, you're standing in a circle and somebody in a social setting, somebody says something that's offensive and says it inside the circle like, we're going to get away with this because we all agree, right? Start practicing calling that out in that social circle, right? Start practicing and saying, you know, I'm not really cool with that. I don't agree with that. That's another way that you can start breaking down your own personal boundaries as far as being a good ally. And then, of course, recognize and understand that when you hear an argument that relies on all the norms that we grew up with, that argument's going to make sense to you. So when somebody talks about Blakeman's trans ban,
We'll talk about that.
we will, and sports, I'm just using that as an example. We can dive a little deeper into that, but that argument about women athletes and transgender women athletes, that preys on our instinctive bent towards what we've all been taught as normal, right? The binary. Being a good ally means, you know what, let me go research the other side of that. This sits well with me because it makes sense to me, but I think that it's exclusionary. It feels exclusionary. It feels like there's something not fair going on here. Let me research the other side. Let me assume that this argument is preying on how I was raised, and I'm going to agree with it. Do you see what I'm saying? So go research the other side. See what the other side is saying. Seek somebody out from the community and say, where am I getting this wrong? This is making sense to me. And more often than not, you'll find out that there's a concept in there that you weren't even aware of that will switch it a little for you, or at least allow you to see both sides. So.
And I just want to really quickly, I know it can be really hard, especially in social circles that we've had for long periods of time. It can be hard to challenge our friends. It can be difficult to challenge our family members. But my 13-year-old did it in middle school. And if she can do it in middle school, we can all do it, right? I think we can all do that.
We point out the trans athlete issue, but there's something closer to home, which is there could be a situation for those of you who are women where a trans woman is using the bathroom and someone reads that person and realizes that that's a trans woman and they start going off on that trans woman. It is very helpful for someone to stand up and say, stop, leave them alone, and allow that trans woman to escape out of the room before they get physically, attacked. So it's really important to be aware that those are the kind of things that are even closer to home, because the number of trans athletes is very small, but the number of trans women that need to use the facilities is very large, as in we all need to.
And I just want to add to, because to Julie's point earlier, I don't want to poo-poo any steps in the right direction. I was once told by a black woman that she doesn't need her white allies to lead the fight, but she wants to know that you have a lawn sign that says Black Lives Matter. And she said, I want to know if I'm driving through your neighborhood and my car gets a flat tire, I want to know what door, what house is safe to knock on, right? And our audience members probably know Be the Rainbow started an initiative several years ago where we have lawn signs. Some of us keep them out all year long. Other people put them out for the month of June. And interestingly, what we've been told over the years is that families moved to town specifically because they saw these lawn signs up and they said, this is a safe community for me and my family. So I don't want to poo-poo showing up to Pride or putting out a sign, because it is impactful and it has a bigger impact to the queer community than you might even realize, just to show that you're an ally. But it also signifies, it's a big signal that you are a safe place to go, right? So that's important. But it is the first step. Yeah. All right, so we've spoken a lot about what we can do as individuals to show up and be better allies. I was speaking to a mother last night, actually, and she has a non-binary child. And she expressed to me that her child has had to advocate for themselves in community settings, in schools, time and time again, because their teachers were unaware of what was happening, federally, statewide, locally. How do you think we can start to change the community setting to be more accepting and more aware? And how do we help, these leaders in our communities see people as people?
Well, my answer always is education, education, education. We have going back, we have stories, but my feeling is that if you look at the world as a complete package, all right, and you take the group of people who are supportive of our community, that may be 30% of the world's population or New York State's population or whatever. And if you take a look at the group of people who have nothing but hate, nothing but bad thoughts about our community, maybe that's another 30% on the other side of the scale. But then in the middle, there's a 40% group of people who, depending on what news channel they listen to, are getting this probably most likely bad information or misinformation, but are still good people and want to do the right thing, but just don't know what the right thing is, don't know the truth. That is what we call the movable middle, and that is where we try to focus on our educational work to start getting people to understand, wait a minute, there's more to this story than I thought. And whether we're talking about the trans ban, whether we're talking about, where trans people come from, whatever it is, there's a lot more to the story than people realize. And that's our job, to try to get that information out so that people can get a true picture of what it means to be LGBTQIA+.
Yeah, so you struck a chord with school, right, and teachers, and the New York State Education Department has put out guidelines. First of all, it's important to understand you probably have numbers on this, but the mental health challenges and suicide rates in this community is alarming. It has to do with being marginalized, right? Anybody that is actually outside of the margins of society is going to have a tougher time of it, which also means mental health challenges and substance use challenges as well as they come up. And so I think that it's important to understand that in the classroom, children often know who they are at a pretty young age, and some of them are asking for respect at a pretty young age. And we get intakes, telling us that my child came to me, said that I am fluid, non-binary, and I want to be addressed as they, and here is the name that I want to be used, and parents will go to the teacher or the administration in a school and be either shut down or quieted or poo-pooed, which sends a very clear message to that child that you are outside the norm, we don't want to deal with you. Some teachers will do their best, that's individually. Some teachers who understand will try to do their best, but they try to keep it out of the realm of reaching into anybody else's home, right? So we're going to talk about this in school, and then it's going to find its way home, and now the school administration is going to have a problem. And so we have to start electing school boards that understand the damage that is done to children when they are approached in this manner, being marginalized at such a young age. And that is one of the things we can do to be good allies, is to make sure that we're voting for school boards that are going to be welcoming of children, to teach others, to ask questions, to make sure that when you see somebody isolated, you go and you ask them very simply, what can I do to help? What can I do to help you? Don't just let them sit there alone. Just put your hand on their shoulder and say, what can I do to help you? If you see an adult or a child feeling or looking that way. So that's one of the things. As far as the leaders in the community, We can start by making it clear and making it open that we don't tolerate. That goes to standing in your social circle and correcting people, right? And the more that gets done, the more the message is out. We're not tolerating that here, right? And then we're going to be welcoming of people who are going to be tolerant. And so getting that out there and out into the ether in your neighborhoods and letting the people know who live amongst you who are having challenges that they are supported. That's what you can do in your neighborhood. So.
And on this topic of marginalization, right, every marginalized group experiences oppression. But I want to introduce the term intersectionality, which is essentially a fancy word of kind of layered and overlapping systems of oppression. And I wonder if either of you want to comment on what that looks like within the queer community.
So intersectionality relates to systems of oppressions and also identities. So like how those identities experience those systems of oppression. So the systems of oppression for people of color are built into, historically, built into everything. And then the systems of oppression that are built into against women, having to fight for the vote, and then all the things that are given about the gender of women, right? About the roles, about what it's okay to say about women, what it's not okay to say about women, all the things that we accept, all the invisible paper cuts that go on that some of us wish were not invisible, but were just completely off the table, not okay to do or say. That also contributes to these systems. Intersectionality refers to class, how much money do I have, where am I in the pecking order, in the hierarchy, in society. Systems of oppression, all of them in our country are affected by capitalism, our economic system, and by our political system and systems. And so intersectionality is, for me, I am female, I am Jewish. Those are the two most top-of-mind identities. Now, if you were to sit down and make a list of all your identities, I actually do this with my students as well, don't think too much, but write down your top 5 identities. See which one comes out first, second, and third, right? So I had 2 friends. One was very much a part of the gay community, and his job was associated with helping gay teenagers and all of that. And the other one was a lawyer and wasn't out for too long and didn't really see himself as part of the community. And when they wrote down their identities, the first one had written gay as the top identity, and the second one had written gay as like the 10th identity, right? So it's an interesting exercise to do, but this is where intersectionality comes in. For some people, the top identity might be where you experience most of the systems of oppression against you. So my top identity has always been female because that's where I experience the oppression. Jewish has been like 5th or 6th. It's actually getting a little higher recently, but so do that as an exercise for yourself. See what comes up. But many people experience those systems of oppression against double and triple identities, right? So we talked about transgender, female transgender, black people, and that's layered. That's a lot, right? That's a lot of systems of oppression against that person. So yeah, that's what.
As an example, in 2015, the National Center for Transgender Equality did a survey for the transgender community, and it was they ended up with just under 28,000 respondents. So we're not talking about like 10 people in a conference room. One of the things they found is that for the overall transgender community, we were dealing with 15% unemployment. At the time, that was 3 times the national rate. However, when they broke that out further for transgender women of color, it was 4 times the national rate. Why the difference? Race. And so that's when we talk about intersectionality, what we're really talking about is how those things overlay on an individual. For me, one of the things that I've spent most of my life as what would be perceived as a straight, cisgender, white, able-bodied male. I always call it the five diamonds, the five aces in a poker game. And so, I've had a lot of blessings. I've had a lot of privilege by being born male, by being born white, by having people assume that I was heterosexual, having people assume that I was cisgender, and having a body that could move around freely, that can climb stairs, climb a ladder, jump, run, whatever has to be done. And when you start stripping those privileges away and you see other community members dealing with those issues, you get a real taste of intersectionality.
Thank you so much. So important to think about, and even in the context of allyship, to better understand how we show up and who may need more support, right? So thank you so much for that. When we started this conversation, we talked a little bit about the history of Pride, and sometimes thinking about in 2024, the fact in the 60s, gay people couldn't even dance together. Sometimes they would need a letter from their psychologist saying that they were sane enough to do a certain job. Like, that feels wild, right? But the reality is that right now, queer people are under vicious attacks, and we need to show up as allies right now. And so I have a question about something that happened locally, and I'm going to ask you both different variations. But first, I'm going to start with Susan. It's important for you all to know that the Nassau County Executive, Bruce Blakeman, a couple of months ago, issued an executive order banning trans women from playing sports in Nassau County facilities, which is egregious on so many levels. But really, Gender Equality New York, Julie's organization, and NYCLU sprung to action. So Susan, I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about that and maybe tell us the outcome. And then I have a special question for Julie's perspective.
About the springing into action?
Tell us what happened, because I don't know that folks know what happened, what the outcome was, NYCLU's part.
It was the first one, right? It was the first. Okay, he's hit a triple play so far. So it was a Wednesday, I think, and on any given day, Julie and I have about 17 things that we don't get to on our to-do list. And then somebody decides to do something stupid, and the whole week blows up, right? With now we have to, So I don't remember. I think I was tied up until the end of the day, and Julie saw it first and got in touch with me, and it's like, oh, yes, of course, we have to do something. And so we did, and I think by Friday we had, or Thursday, was it the next day? Oh, gosh.
It was the next day.
It was the next day, okay. And so many people. So, and so much media came out, which was wonderful because a lot of allies came out. A lot of people were outraged by this. And so we had this great press conference and called attention to it. This is not okay, and had our say about what is going on here, although it was very frightening because Bruce Blakeman had a press conference inside in the executive offices surrounded by little girls and saying how he was going to protect them. And
they wouldn't let anyone in.
And they're doing this to protect women. Which
right here in Nassau County.
Right. Which is, it's just enraging on so many different levels. So then I can talk about the NYCLU, right? So we did that, and we got, the quotes in the newspaper, and then it's like, okay, let's start looking at the legalities of this and what is going on here and what can we do. And so NYCLU took a look at it and said, I think that we can bring a suit. We need plaintiffs, which would mean a sports organization that would be affected by the ban. So a sports organization that allows transgender women and who uses Nassau County facilities. So we found the Roller Rebels, the roller derby team, which was amazing, and they served as our plaintiffs. And we recently had an opinion 2 weeks ago, I think it was 2 weeks ago, time flies, that the judge didn't look at the merits of the case or the content of the violations, but rather went to a process question and said the county executive does not have the authority to issue this declaration and this rule, but the legislature does. So, of course, I'm sitting there listening to the decision going, just stop, don't mention the legislature, just say, no, just don't, no, blah, blah, blah. No, yes, because that means now we have to watch out for the legislature. So that's what we're doing. But it's been stopped. It's not in effect. If the legislature goes ahead and proposes it as a law, it'll take a little while for that to go through the process. We will know about it, and we will be standing up, and we hope that you will join us if that happens. We're hoping it doesn't happen.
And Julie, you were really out front, along with Susan, but you were the face of the press conference. You were working so hard. I just wonder, what did you see from Allies, and is there anything you wish you would have seen more of from Allies in that moment?
I guess I have low expectations. I was very pleased that under 24 hours we were able to bring enough people together to make it look important. Further, I was also very happy that News 12 filmed the group on the steps of the Nassau County Legislative Building, because now every time they run a story about Bruce Blakeman and the trans ban, they run that video of our group together, you know, speaking out against the decision. So that was a part of it. I was actually very surprised at the amount of media attention that we got that I felt was positive. That, you know, I'm sure Fox News may have had something to say about it, but obviously I don't worry about that or even listen to it. But I was surprised locally. I was surprised nationally. I can't tell you how many interviews I did. We had CBS News in our living room. We had, God, I can't remember everyone that we had. It was crazy. We were having all kinds of pulling up and so forth. So that was very positive. So I felt really good about that. I felt very angry, obviously, about that whole ban and even the need to do it. But I will tell you, historically, and this is a sad thing to say, but we have always found Nassau County to be very anti-trans. You know, we talk about rights, and I'm not sure that everyone in the audience knows that the transgender community here in the very blue state of New York did not receive our civil rights until January of 2019. So we're not talking about decades. We're talking at this point of 5 years. And I think that, you know, when we talk about it, because people are like, oh yeah, civil rights, yeah, that means you won't be discriminated against. No, that's not what it means. What it means is that once we have our civil rights, we can cause financial pain against people who discriminate against us. And because we're in a capitalistic world, organizations find it better to train their people rather than to have to pay a $40,000 fine or make a settlement for $50,000. So it's like better we should train our employees so they don't do something stupid so we don't have to pay. But it's not because of the goodness of their heart. Oh, we need to do this because it's the right thing. It's because it might cost us some money and it'll have an impact on the bottom line. And so whenever I do the education and I tell people about civil rights, I go, oh yeah, well that means you won't be discriminated against. No, that's not what it means. What it means is that we can cause some financial pain, which will then correct the organization's direction. But we've had a long-running issue with Nassau County. We had asked Nassau County prior to 2019 to specifically put language in their human rights law in Nassau County to protect gender identity and gender expression, which are the two legal terms that are needed to protect our community. And they refused to do it. They continued to tell us, oh, no, the language that we have is good enough. And every place we went, including the New York Civil Liberties Union, said that language isn't going to cut it. And we continued to battle. And what ended up happening is that I moved from being a regional activist to being a statewide activist because it was clear to me that the only way we were going to get Nassau to do anything was if we got it done with the state. And it took us that long to get it done, but now Nassau has to do it because New York State says it's law.
And, you know, it is important to mention that the trans ban was based on nothing, on no statistics. There was not even a single complaint in Nassau County. It was a hateful attack on a marginalized group. And what we know when power is unchecked is that it festers and it corrupts, right? So it is so important, more important than ever, in fact, that we show up as allies. So I have one more question, and then we're going to open it up to audience Q&A, because I think when we talk about these heavy topics, it's really important to talk about hope and to talk about a vision for the future, what it could look like. And thankfully, there will be a ballot initiative this November that really will be incredible for so many people. It's the most comprehensive, and I'm gonna have Susan talk about what it is. You should definitely make sure you know about it, tell your friends, family about it, vote for it. I want Julie to, once Susan explains it, to talk about what it would mean for the queer community. But Susan, can you talk to us about the ERA ballot initiative?
Yeah, I also just want to say that when Julie talks about getting a law passed, that means that Julie's sleeping in Albany like all the time. Probably there more than I am. And for years and years and years. These things take years. So if you're interested in lobbying, come see Julie, come see me. We always need people, allies. So the Equal Rights Amendment, I always start this out by saying, for the older women in the crowd, this is not your mother's Equal Rights Amendment. Phyllis Schlafly is not with us, so, you know, yeah. I know, trauma. So this is the New York State Equal Rights Amendment, and it, of course, when we think of an Equal Rights Amendment, we think about gender, right? So we think about adding gender as a protected class, meaning that they won't be discriminated against, but you might now have a way to pursue the situation for damages. So we started out with gender, and then the Dobbs decision happened. And then we took a look, and we saw so many people under attack. So many people. And with so many people vulnerable, why are we only going to have an Equal Rights Amendment? What are we going to do, add one at a time? One at a time? Julie had to fight for years for gender, which protected gender identity and expression. And so a whole bunch of groups got together and said, we're going to put together an Equal Rights Amendment in New York State that is going to protect everybody, and it's going to protect reproductive rights. So this, think about it not as the ERA, but the New York State ERA. It's very important to remember this is New York State only, and that it will, and I'm going to try to get the list right, disability, age, ethnicity, national origin, gender identity, gender expression. I believe sexual preference is in there, pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes, and I think I'm probably leaving out a couple of more categories. But that's the New York State Equal Rights Amendment. It needed to pass as a piece of legislation twice in the New York State Legislature in 2 separate sessions, which it has, and now it is going to be on the ballot in November. We hit a glitch, which we're working through right now, and we do believe that we're going to win. A Rochester group brought suit against it, saying on the basis of process that the Attorney General did not provide guidance in the right time frame in conjunction with the second passage. And so the judge agreed, so it's on hold for right now, but we do believe that we will win on appeal, and we are moving forward, and we need a small army of people to join the New York State Equal Rights campaign so that we can start spreading the word. We're having house parties. I think Melanie's gonna have a house party or a yard party or something. We need people to know about this, and we need people to join this effort. We have until November, and right now we're in the building stage of telling people about it, making sure. So I would ask each of you to please tell 3, 4, or 5 people about this between now and next Saturday. Okay?
And if you would like to have a house party or do postcards, you can get in touch with me, and I will happily direct you.
Yeah.
But Julie, will you quickly tell us, I know we're running a little late, we have to open it up to Q&A, but will you tell us what the ERA would mean for the queer community?
Well, it would really strengthen our laws in regard to discrimination specifically. I think it would also, and maybe I'm wrong in this, but it might help us in our schools as well, because that's a real issue for our young people. But again, what it does is it supports our community. It takes that extra step to make people aware of the fact that, yes, we deserve protection. I mean, it's as simple as that. Right. And that we deserve the rights that everyone else has.
Yeah. And so when we think about what it means to be an ally individually in our community and then sort of more globally, I think these two examples of legislation are really important, right? Our responsibility as allies doesn't begin and end with Pride Month, but it is incumbent upon all of us to pay attention to the laws and understand how it really impacts the LGBTQI plus community, right? And that's where the real allyship work starts to begin. I'm going to open it up for Q&A, but before I do, I'm going to quickly read some community rules that I think are important. I'm going to read them really quickly, and then I'm going to say, do you agree? And you're going to say yes, hopefully. And if you don't agree, I'm going to ask you just to sit there in your uncomfortableness and stay silent, right? if we paid attention to Susan, right? Okay. So first and foremost, don't yuck my yum. Do we know what this is? Do we have children? So essentially, if you don't like what's being said, just keep it quiet, okay? When you're speaking, use I statements. Avoid making generalizations. One mic, one voice, which means only one person should speak at a time. And lastly, make space, take space, which means if you may have a lot of questions, and that's great, but we want to make sure that we're passing the mic around. So if you've asked a question, make sure others have had an opportunity to ask before you ask a second question. Okay. And do you...
I'll grab this one.
Okay.
So if anyone has anything they'd like to say, please raise your hand. And especially this is important that you use the mic for the folks that are watching at home so that they'll be able to hear you. You don't need to get up, but you can just raise your hand and I'll come to you. Who's brave first? Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Ruth Kleinman. I use she and her pronouns. And I live here in Port Washington. I grew up here and I'm now raising my family here. And I'm wondering if you can go into a little more detail, Melanie, about the Pride Festival, the Be the Rainbow Festival coming up so that people in the audience here and online can learn more about it, since I know it's coming up and I know some of the details, but that might be a good starting point.
Absolutely. So Be the Rainbow started a few years ago. 3 friends came together, 2 of whom were queer. One was a cisgender ally. That's me. And, they came to me and they said, we don't have a Pride celebration. And I was so embarrassed and uncomfortable that I had not realized that. And that was a moment for me where I was like, I am such a bad ally. How did I not know this? So we sprung into action. We put on the very first Pride event in the history of the town, which were several. We do a Chalk the Walk event every year, which is the day before the Pride Festival and Walk. This year it's June 14th at 4 p.m. It is super fun. We provide the chalk. There's ice cream. There's music. It's a beautiful event. We draw beautiful pictures and positive affirmations. So the next day when we kick off our walk, people get to walk on this beautiful love fest of a path. And then we have a Pride Festival with a band. So that'll be June 16th. It is free. This year and a little bit last year, Be the Rainbow has expanded some of our programming. There is a a exhibit up at the Port Washington Library, and it highlights some of our queer folks here in Port Washington. It's really interesting. I highly suggest you check it out. Be the Rainbow is also visiting many of the elementary schools to do some programming. We have this event, which is our first time ever, and I'm trying to think that may be it for this month. But we're on social media, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. Please do follow along and invite your friends. I have been told that the Pride Festival and Chalk the Walk are the best events of the year. So I'm just going to share that. What's that? Oh, June 5th. Did I say the 16th? June 14th is Chalk the Walk. June 15th, I'm sorry, it's Saturday. The very next day is the Pride Festival. Thank you for that. And if you don't have questions, I'm going to give you a prompt. I suspect some people have questions and maybe they're feeling uncomfortable. It is okay. This is a safe place. You can get up and ask your question. But I do want to prompt you with, at the beginning of our program today, I asked you to think about how you show up as an ally. And I want you to think about, after hearing all of this amazing information from Julie and Susan, has that shifted a little bit? Has that given you thoughts about where you will move on your journey? And if you'd like to share that, we'd love to hear it. Sure.
I would like to, so my name is Michelle, and I use she, her pronouns, and I don't do that regularly. And I'm a teacher, and I work in a community where I think if I introduced myself that way to my parents, it would not be received well. And I'm not really sure what I'm looking for, except that I want to be a better ally. I've done the lawn signs. I've done all the walks. My daughter's one of the ones who interviewed one of the couples that's on display at the library. Very proud of that. But there's just some spaces where being an ally can feel uncomfortable and I don't know. I'm just sharing my thoughts in that.
I think, first of all, that's so brave of you to share your vulnerability with us. So can we give her a round of applause? I think that's great. So the question was, well, I think there was a comment about, she's shown up to Pride and, she's got the lawn sign and these things, but there are certain social circles, family situations where, introducing concepts or even introducing her pronouns would be really difficult.
Particularly as a profession, as a teacher. I would love to be, I teach young kids, 4th grade and whatever. I do have a tiny little thing. Yeah, or just, I don't know.
Okay. You're probably going to have, I'm thinking someone to say. Also, Julie and I will tell you a little story about education. I'll share that with you in a second. But when it comes to the classroom as a teacher, it obviously can be rough road terrain. But I think that it begins, ironically, with education, right? And so when we get phone calls that there is either my child is not being honored in their classroom, what can I do? What we try to do is work with the administration, we try to find out, okay, is the administration friendly but resistant? Is the administration just resistant? Is the teacher trying to honor the child inside the classroom? And this was one of the most recent ones that I got, and the teacher in some cases was trying but couldn't formally come out and talk about it in the classroom. So what we like to do is we like to approach the administration, and teachers can try to do this, approach the administration and see about educational programs or ally programs, or is any way to introduce the topic in a way so that we can start sending messages to the children inside the building. You have allies here, you have adults who want you to feel safe, and as a teacher, you can do that. You can use the right pronouns with that child, right? If it's a landmine to ask everybody in the classroom to do it, then let's try to educate everybody from administration on down and try to get into the building that way with teaching. But you as the teacher can always honor the child. with the right pronouns, you know? And that will come with practice. And I'm going to make myself very vulnerable here for a second. I am having to practice relating to my own child, my adult child, and I am messing it up. And so I'm trying to do it more and more and more so that I'm sending my adult child a message that they are valued and honored and the choices that they made for their life is accepted by me. Because every time we don't forget those paper cuts. They hurt. Paper cuts hurt, and they happen constantly. So.
Well, I would just simply say that this is just another to-do list item. There is legislation that we're looking at, which instead of, Susan mentioned it, and she kind of slid it in, and I don't think anyone really caught it, but she talked about the New York State Education Department sending out guidelines. Guidelines are not rules. Guidelines are, you should do this. You should do it. But it's not, you will do it. And unfortunately, what's going to happen is there's going to have to be some legislation that says, I'm sorry, there are specific things that you must do if you want to continue to educate New Yorkers. And unfortunately, that's where the direction that we're going to have to go in. And guess what? We're going to need allies to help get that bill passed.
And I just wanted to add too, you know, there are different cultures at every school, right? And some are hostile and some are welcoming, and you've got everything in between. And as much as I think certainly, probably everyone in this room and definitely us, we wish it was just a light switch situation where we could just all change and everybody could be seen and feel supported. We know that that's just not the way change happens, right? So finding out if there's a DEI committee that you could potentially join, you know, writing a letter to your superintendent or your principal and trying to bring some inclusive programming. Those are smaller steps to start to change that culture. You know, there are a lot of teachers, and teachers, like, I mean, y'all are doing the work, right? Really shaping people. So like it or not, it's a huge responsibility on you, right? But if you notice, I know from the time, I grew up in the 80s, right? I'm telling y'all how old I am. We did not have inclusive material really at all. Maybe once a year, twice a year when you were learning about maybe Martin Luther King Jr. Day, right? And I think the more we can incorporate different types of folks, different types of backgrounds, and celebrate, you know, different historical figures into lesson plans, that's where we start to normalize everybody and sort of decenter our own like white cisgender experience. So I think, you know, you have a lot of power and creativity. And if you want, I'm happy to talk with you after. I know some great teachers who are really doing wonderful work in that space that I'm happy to connect you with. We've got a question.
Hi, everyone. Can I speak real quickly to my friend Michelle? And then I want to ask a question to the amazing panel. My name's Amanda Perez Leader, and my pronouns are she, her. And I also use ella to identify myself as a Latina and as a Spanish speaker. Michelle, I have found in my professional work and when working with organizations and with professionals that have concerns like yours, something I've often said is lean on the organization's values, right? To make an argument for a suggested new behavior or practice. So I'm guessing maybe your school district has a value that sounds something like, you know, we care about every student feeling welcomed, feeling a sense of belonging and safety here. And from that, like really well-established value that it's the job of everyone in that school district, right, to kind of exemplify those values, that you have a new suggestion on how we live out that value, right? I have found that to be helpful, to kind of just suggest maybe a new community that's being overlooked or a new need that's emerging, and that you want, again, you want to practice maybe using pronouns or bringing more education about the LGBTQIA community in the spirit of that value, right, that we carry out in other ways. So I hope that's helpful. You all are amazing. This panel has been wonderful. Thank you. I wanted to follow up on something that I felt pretty personally activated on, and that's when you were both talking about the Blakeman press conference. I thought I had read a bunch about it. I did not know that you gave me a real visual around how he was surrounded by young, I'm guessing cisgender girls, and there was this talk of him protecting them. So to me, that's pinning women up against women, right? And that is, again, making this idea that trans women are something that we should fear, and that something that young women need to fear. And that is, besides being incredibly harmful, it is wrong, right? So there is an education piece there, right? So that I don't want the greater community of allies to miss. How can we be supportive? Certainly there has been attempts to combat the legislation that he was proposing, but there is a huge miseducation and harmful moment that I don't want to go, unnoticed. So would love to hear your suggestions. How can we support that harm and that miseducation, right? That fear that he is stoking, that I'm sure activates all of us.
Well, I think what we have to do, first of all, is realize that the whole question of transgender athletes and transgender people competing is an area that is complicated. And we don't have a lot of information yet. There's not been a lot of studies. There's not been, it seems as though when I've gone to look into detail that I can find 5 studies that say this and 5 studies that say that. So there needs to be more work done. But what I would question whenever I see these types of bans is, let's take a look at things one little piece at a time. This ban was across the board, any trans feminine person participating in any girls' league. So my first question is, so we're talking about college athletes, Olympic athletes, and 5-year-olds on a soccer field. We're talking about soccer and bowling. We're talking about table tennis and track. We're talking about the local Little League organization and the U.S. Olympic Committee or the NCAA. So when we create a ban like that, we're putting all of this in the same pot. When we talk about that 5-year-old that just wants to play with their friends, they want to learn teamwork. They want to be out on a sunny day running in the grass with their friends. They want to share orange slices at halftime. They want to have the cookies or the donuts at the end of the match. It's all about being social. It's all about supporting each other. It's all about being friends. It's all about being a team. Let's go to the other end. We want to talk about Olympic athletes. What I find interesting is that the first thing that people do is they criminalize the trans athlete. But the trans athlete can't participate in the Olympics without following the Olympic rules that are in place for that sport. So if I want to participate and you give me a list of 10 things, 50 things, whatever it is you want, and I'm able to accomplish all those items on your list, and I am now allowed to participate, why are you attacking me? The same thing goes for the NCAAs. There are specific rules for trans athletes in order to participate. Again, if I go through all the steps and I follow everything that's being done, and now I want to participate, why are you attacking me? Let me tell you a very quick little story of a young trans athlete, male, who wanted to wrestle. And they wanted to wrestle boys because they are a trans male. However, in Texas, the state law is that your sex designation determines who you can participate with. So what they did was they forced this trans athlete to wrestle against the girls. Can you imagine what would happen when that team traveled to another high school, and now this trans athlete, who specifically does not want to be wrestling girls but wants to be wrestling boys, who is on testosterone and is literally mopping up the mat with these girl wrestlers, can you imagine what the crowds were doing? Can you imagine what it was like to just drive the bus in or drive the bus out with people screaming at the bus and everything else? What was the point? So I think that we have to, whenever someone comes in and says, oh, we're going to do a protection and we're going to do a ban, we need to start asking some questions. Oh, really? Is this going to affect the 5-year-old? Are you talking about dealing with Olympic athletes or NCAA athletes, which we were in the case of Nassau because the swim facility was being affected? What do you really mean by this? Why are we doing this? When Blakeman was asked specifically, well, how many complaints have you had? Well, we haven't had any complaints yet, but I'm thinking ahead. Oh, really? The reality is that I wish that we had more trans athletes. The trans athletes are probably a microscopic fraction of our community. And that's because most of our community is hiding, because any time that they've even lifted their head up a little bit to just catch a little sunshine, someone went around and smacked them in the head. So I think that if you want to be a good ally, we need to ask some questions. Does that mean everybody? Does that mean you're going to make determinations for the NCAA? Oh, really? I think what was also interesting in that specific case is that I specifically called the office to get a copy of what he was going to be signing the next day, so at least we knew what was happening. And we were told at that time that they weren't going to release anything until after he signed the proclamation or the executive order. And the only reason we knew what it was before we went there is because the New York Post printed out exactly what it included. So even though they said they weren't releasing it to anyone until after he signed it, that was a lie. It's your decision whether you want to re-elect a liar.
I just want to address this divisiveness. This is meant to divide. This is meant to other, right? And so that misinformation and that miseducation, right? That piece that got to you as far as, wait a minute, so why are people were buying into it again because of what I said before, because it goes right to our instincts of what we have been taught is normal, right? So a transgender individual is something other than this normative base that we want to think about life in. And so we're going to separate this person out somehow and make you believe and everybody believe that that is the existence of a human being that is different than us, that is different than the norm, that is different than, fill in the blank. And when we fall for that, I don't know about you, but my instincts when this is going on, no. You come on in, join the club. Yes, you are welcome here. That's what we all need to do, and that's what we need to teach our children, and that's what we need to say when we talk about this. We need to say, I don't accept the premise of this. I don't even need to talk about all of it, all the rest of it, right? I don't accept the premise Full stop. That's how you change how people think about this. And then call me, I'll put you in touch with Julie. Because Julie's a big fan of teaching, right? And I do want to tell you the story. When I first was learning, I was very aware of, you can't, and this is another ally thing, you can't make it the responsibility of the person that you just did harm to teach you, oh, I made a mistake, can you tell me what I did wrong? Now, when a man does that to me and I'm in a bad mood, it doesn't end well. I'm like, yeah, go figure it out for yourself, like, don't, but honestly and truthfully, it really is, I shouldn't have to do the emotional labor of teaching you after you just did me harm. So I said, Julie, we need to go out to lunch because I'm learning a lot. And I was breaking my own rule by asking Julie for help. And Julie immediately put me at ease and said, no, it's okay. I'm glad that you're aware of that concept, but how is anyone gonna learn if I don't teach them? So Julie is very much okay with the teaching and likes to and wants to and sees the value in it, which I think is fantastic. It's a lot of emotional labor. So I just want everybody to keep that concept in mind. But going back to the ban, again, I think the way we countered that is to say to our children and our neighbors and everybody else, he's up to no good with this. He's trying to dehumanize people. I don't accept the premise. So let's have that conversation, right? Maybe that's the way to do it.
And Amanda, going back to something you had said when you first started speaking about finding that value, right? I think it can be helpful, particularly in environments where people may not be that receptive, is to look for those validators, right? So as I said, like NYCLU was out front, Gender Equality New York was out front, but there are many women's organizations, the National Organization for Women, Planned Parenthood, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that have definitively stated trans women are women, right? And I think that's a premise that Blakeman was trying to challenge in that particular environment. And this is where allyship really comes in, where we don't give them an inch, right? Because trans women are women. So how dare they pit us against one another? How dare they other one of us, right? And I think it's about showing up. It's about speaking out always. And even if you're scared, as Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, even if your voice shakes, right? We've got to do the right thing. And if you need help, definitely reach out. There's a lot of local resources that can help you and walk you through it. We can put you in touch with, NYCLU and Gender Equality New York, and we've got local resources as well. You're not alone. There's a huge community here. We've got to organize ourselves, and we've got to support. Because, look, while Gender Equality New York and NYCLU were able to stop this ban for now, don't be fools. More is coming, right? So we've got to really get our acts together. We got to make sure this ballot initiative passes, and we have to be active participants in this fight.
I'm going to go off topic just a tiny bit. One of the things that I find most interesting, that I think is really important to tell people as part of the education work, is that there's cutting research being done currently on brains. And specifically, there is work being done on transgender brains. And the first thing that I learned, which I thought was really interesting, is that there is a specific difference between a male brain and a female brain. Literally, they are shaped differently, and electronically within the brain, as it works, they work differently. There really is a men are from Mars, women are from Venus syndrome, if you will. When they took a look at transgender women's brains, someone like me, what they found was that the brain was shaped very similar to a cisgender woman's brain. Conversely, when they looked at a trans male brain, they found that trans male brain, again, looked similar to a cisgender male brain. So when we say, this is who we are, this isn't a lifestyle, this isn't a choice, no one would choose to be transgender, believe me. This is who we are, and we mean it on a biological level. The way we think, the way we feel, I always knew there was something a little bit different about it. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew there was something different. There was a period of time in my life as I was growing up where I started getting bullied. And so my parents' answer was, okay, well then you need to go out there and fight. And I was like, why do I want to fight? I don't want to fight. That's not what I want to do. And I knew that something wasn't kosher there either. I will tell you that I learned how to stand up to bullies, though, and I didn't look for a fight just to have a fight, but I did look for a fight if someone was crossing my path. However, the point that I was trying to get at is that I always think of my dad who tried to be John Wayne, and I was always like, I don't want that. That's not what I want. And that was before I even realized there was a term called transgender. And as time went on, I continued to be me, but I watched my father soften year after year after year, and he was far, far away from John Wayne by the time he passed away. So it was really incredible to see that. So, a short story.
Thank you. We do have another question in the back here.
Hello, I'm Angelina, she, her. I just want to say thank you for this event. Try not to get emotional, but this is the type of event that younger me needed. And to be a queer person now, working for a wonderful theater and being a part of a community that is supporting this programming and supporting these conversations is amazing. So thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for all the work that you're doing. Thanks. The second question is, going back to what you were saying about, it shouldn't be on the person who is experiencing the emotional, like the punches, and then to take the time and the emotional labor to explain to the offender what is offensive or how they can be a better ally. I tend to go with what Julie does, and my mindset typically is sometimes I'm the first gay person a person meets. So, and I might be the only person that enters their orbit. And if I can humanize myself or, just make them think differently or just plant that seed, I feel like I've done it because I'm entering spaces that are different from my identity and myself. But how do you navigate people who are very adamant about not changing, unavoidable people? So maybe it's a family member, a neighbor, or someone who is very committed to hateful practices, hateful language, not expanding. How do you navigate that while also taking a second to preserve yourself?
Believe it or not, one of the first things I read once I graduated college, I was like, oh, I don't have to read books that I'm being told to read. I can read my own thing. And I was going through some family issues at the time, having nothing to do with being transgender. And one of the things that I read about was, and it was really amazing to me, is that if there is someone who is poisonous to you, you need to remove yourself from that person. And I truly believe that. I mean, if someone has no interest in changing and is just going to be that way, then the more time that you spend with that person, the more you're getting poisoned. There are certain things, yes, we're going to have Thanksgiving with Uncle Ed, and Uncle Ed is, out of his mind. Okay, maybe you do go, maybe you break some bread, but you stay away from any discussion about anything. Maybe there's something you can share. Maybe the football game, you both like the same team or something. Sure, do that. But try to eliminate or reduce the amount of exchanging that you have to do with that poisonous person, because all it's going to do is wear you down. And I found that there were people that I actually had to remove from my life in order for me to live a healthy and happy life. And I found that I indeed did live a happy and healthy life by excluding some people. And unfortunately, they included some very close people who should have been there for me but weren't. And again, that had nothing to do with transgender. That had everything to do with the poisonous relationship.
I just want to acknowledge the generosity of the first part of what you were saying as far as exposing yourself to teaching, as Julie does, and I think that's very generous. Make sure you're not taking too many pieces out of yourself. I think that's what we need to think about, right? When Julie was talking about self-preservation, so the people that are doing the teaching, that's a conscious decision to do the teaching, and it's very generous and wonderful. But as people who are asking to be taught, let's be aware that that comes at a cost. So I think that both can exist together. As far as, I heard you say, I may be the only gay person they know, so this will be the impression that they get, and I need to, right? That's, again, very generous and probably a good instinct, but I think you need to make sure that you're taking care of yourself as well. So I think that there might be cases where, and you're gonna know this in the immediate moment or in the moments or weeks that you're with somebody, is this person open, or is this person not worth me taking so many pieces out of myself, right? And I think we all have to make those decisions. I always say that there's two, and I'm not a psychologist, but this is from my own life experience. I had 3 people in my life that I had trouble being in the same room with without feeling crazy or without feeling like there was something wrong with me. I got over it with one of them. I didn't get over it with the other 2. And when you can't get to that place where the key gets unlocked and you can be in a space with somebody and keep yourself intact and keep your mental health intact, then the next thing you have to do is geographically remove yourself and your exposure to them. Now, hopefully you can get to the first, most healthy place, but many times we can't. So that's, I think we all have that in our lives, and it's too bad. But I also say it's the loss of the person. I'm fantastic. You're fantastic. If somebody doesn't want to be with you, wow, their loss.
And they were perfect, I think, in their response. But I do want to just say, because sometimes we need to hear it, you deserve to be accepted as your full self in all ways, every day, okay? So really that portion that Susan and Julie were talking about self-care and making sure that your soul and your heart is fed is really, really important. It's not selfish. These are the things that you need, and these are the things that you deserve. And I just want to mention, because I know we're talking a lot about education, Julie's organization, Gender Equality New York, does incredible presentations on quite a variety of topics. This is what she does, and so if folks are looking to learn more, if they have an organization that you think would benefit, should definitely just get in touch with Julie.
Does anyone else have anything to share? Nearing our time to be finished this evening, but I just want to give one more opportunity to anyone else who, no? Okay, well, I personally would like to just thank our amazing panelists. Thank you so much. And Melanie, I hope that everyone, thank you. I really hope everyone can walk away from this evening with something to think about, something to share with the people in our lives that we love, and maybe some other people in our lives who, may need a little bit more education on this. I think this was a wonderful discussion. If you know of anyone who wanted to be here tonight but couldn't, this recording will live on our YouTube channel. So, you can reach out to get that link if you don't already have it. And thank you all for taking time to be here and supporting this amazing organization. Thank you. Have a good evening.